My name is Charmaine, 35 years old, and at my own wedding reception, my mother-in-law read a list of rules demanding I hand over my career and finances to her family. I asked 2 questions, understood everything, called off the wedding, kept my villa, and walked away with every dollar I earned. That night, there were 85 missed calls. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut, meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our 4-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary and my prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and pushed myself to the absolute limit just to earn a single word of praise. That praise never came. Instead, I learned early on that my worth to my family was entirely conditional. I took that deep-seated trauma and turned it into relentless professional fuel. By the time I turned 35, I was a highly sought-after software developer and a senior vice president of acquisitions at a major tech firm. I relocated to Atlanta, Georgia, leaving the coldness of Connecticut behind. I built my own empire, purchasing a custom-designed $2.5 million villa in the exclusive Buckhead neighborhood. I thought I had completely escaped the toxic dynamics of my youth. More importantly, I thought I had found a partner who celebrated my independence. His name was Jordan Banks. Jordan was the director of a local nonprofit organization. He was handsome, charismatic, and constantly preached about building a powerful legacy. I fell in love with his community spirit and his apparent devotion to family. I thought his traditional values meant he would protect me. I had no idea that his version of building an empire actually meant using my venture capital bonuses to fund his relatives. Our wedding reception was held at the luxurious St. Regis, Atlanta. I had spared absolutely no expense for this night, pouring my heart and soul into creating a flawless experience. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the 200 guests seated across the grand ballroom. The tables were draped in imported silk linens and adorned with towering centerpieces of white orchids, hydrangeas, and trailing ivy. Every single detail, from the custom monogram napkins to the 5-course gourmet dinner featuring filet mignon and lobster tail, was meticulously planned. And every single detail was entirely funded by me. I paid $150,000 in cash for this reception. The Banks family, despite boasting loudly about their prominent status in the community, contributed absolutely nothing to the wedding fund. Their only contribution was a generic store-bought fruit platter that Jordan's mother insisted on placing in the bridal suite, complaining that the catered appetizers were too fancy. I ignored the glaring disrespect at the time, foolishly believing that marrying Jordan meant blending our lives with grace and overlooking minor slights. The dinner plates were finally being cleared when Dolores Banks, my new mother-in-law, abruptly stood up from the main family table. Dolores was a 58-year-old woman who draped herself in church lady self-righteousness. Tonight, she wore an overly elaborate, heavily beaded silver gown that looked entirely too much like a bridal dress. She picked up a silver spoon and tapped it aggressively against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched clinking sound echoed through the massive ballroom, instantly silencing the low hum of conversation and the soft music playing in the background. The 200 guests turned their collective attention toward the dance floor and then toward the elevated sweetheart table where Jordan and I sat. I smiled warmly, leaning forward in my custom Vera Wang gown. I fully expected a traditional heartfelt toast welcoming me into their family fold. Instead, Dolores reached into her oversized designer clutch and pulled out a bright yellow laminated sheet of paper. She adjusted her reading glasses, looked directly at me with a cold, calculated stare, and spoke into the microphone with a voice dripping with patronizing sweetness. Family and friends. Dolores began, her voice booming through the surround sound speakers. We are gathered here tonight to witness the beautiful expansion of the Banks family legacy. Jordan has always been a pillar of our community, and today he finally takes his rightful place as the head of his household. But we all know that to build a strong, enduring family, we must adhere to the traditional rules that have kept our people grounded for generations. Therefore, I have taken the liberty of preparing the Banks family directives for wives. A sudden ripple of confused whispers swept through the room. Several of my tech industry colleagues exchanged bewildered glances. My mother Elaine, sitting a few tables away, merely raised an eyebrow and took a slow sip of her wine, completely unfazed by the public humiliation I was enduring. Dolores held the laminated paper high in the air, ensuring everyone could see it, and began reading her list of demands. Rule number 1, Dolores announced loudly, pausing for dramatic effect. Charmaine, from this day forward, you are no longer an independent software developer. You are a Banks. As such, you will step down from your demanding corporate career by the end of this calendar year to properly manage the home, serve your husband, and prepare for children. A wife's true place is creating a sanctuary, not competing in the workforce. My heart pounded violently against my ribs. I stared at Dolores in pure, unadulterated disbelief. Step down from my career, the very career I built from the ground up through sleepless nights and relentless ambition, the career that paid for the roof over her son's head, the luxury car he drove, and the extravagant meal she was currently digesting. But Dolores was not finished. She paced confidently across the polished wooden dance floor, clearly reveling in the captive audience. Rule number 2, she continued, her voice echoing off the marble walls with a terrifying authority. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and financial independence in a marriage only breeds secrecy and rebellion. Therefore, your financial portfolio, all savings accounts, corporate investments, and real estate holdings will be consolidated into the Banks Family Trust by the 1st of next month. And as the elder matriarch of this family, I will personally oversee and manage this trust to ensure fairness, transparency, and equitable distribution among Jordan's siblings when times get tough. The ballroom went completely dead silent. You could literally hear a pin drop. I felt all the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and paralyzed. Did this woman really just announce to 200 of my closest friends, family members, and professional colleagues that I was expected to hand over my multi-million-dollar net worth to her? Did she genuinely believe she was entitled to the wealth I bled to accumulate? I turned my head slowly to look at Jordan, my new husband. I was desperately waiting for him to react. Surely he would jump out of his seat, storm down to the dance floor, take the microphone away from his delusional mother, and immediately shut down this insane, humiliating display of disrespect. I fully expected him to protect me. I expected him to laugh it off as some sort of terrible, inappropriate joke. Instead, Jordan took a slow, deliberate sip of his dark liquor. He simply leaned over in his chair, keeping his gaze firmly fixed on the ice cubes melting in his glass, and whispered to me under his breath, "Babe, just relax and let her finish talking. Do not make a massive scene in front of our pastor and all these church folks. We already discussed sharing our blessings when we got married. She just wants what is best for the long-term family legacy." In that exact horrifying fraction of a second, the thick veil of deception completely lifted from my eyes. The handsome, charming man sitting next to me was not a loving partner. He was a strategic parasite. And the smiling older woman standing on the dance floor with a laminated list of financial demands was not a welcoming mother-in-law. She was a calculated predator. I realized with sickening clarity that I had spent my entire adult life subconsciously trying to buy love and prove my worth to people who only saw me as a walking bank account. I had accidentally chosen a man who perfectly mirrored the exact emotional toxicity I thought I had permanently escaped. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. I was no longer that desperate little girl crying in a pale blue room in Connecticut. I was a 35-year-old self-made powerhouse who legally owned every single asset I had acquired. Dolores was still talking into the microphone, rambling aggressively about a wife's duty to submit blindly, soaking in the stunned silence of the massive crowd. A strange, icy calm washed over my entire body. I carefully picked up my monogrammed silk napkin and placed it neatly on the table. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The loud rustle of my heavy tulle wedding dress sounded deafening in the eerily quiet room. I took a deep, steadying breath, plastered a radiant, terrifying smile on my face, and walked purposefully down the steps of the elevated stage, marching straight toward my mother-in-law. Before my satin heels could even touch the polished mahogany of the dance floor, two figures intentionally blocked my path. It was Tyrell Jordan's older brother and his wife, Tasha. Tyrell was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that I knew for a fact was rented because I had accidentally seen the past due notice emailed to Jordan's account last week. Tasha stood next to him wearing a deeply plunging emerald green dress that screamed for attention. She held a glass of my expensive champagne, swirling it with an arrogant smirk plastered across her face. They moved with a synchronized predatory entitlement, effectively cutting me off from reaching Dolores and the microphone. The rest of the ballroom remained frozen in that suffocating silence, watching this family spectacle unfold like a slow-motion car crash. I could feel the collective gaze of 200 people burning into my back, waiting to see how the successful, independent bride would handle being publicly leashed by her new in-laws. "Well, it is about time someone finally said it out loud," Tasha announced. Her voice was not a whisper. She projected her words so the first 3 rows of guest tables could hear every single syllable. She took a slow, theatrical sip of her drink before looking me up and down with eyes full of deep-seated bitter jealousy. We were honestly getting tired of waiting for Jordan to step up and act like a real man. "A woman like you needs guidance, Charmaine. You have been running wild with all that corporate money for too long, completely neglecting family values. But do not worry, we are here to help you transition into your new role as a traditional submissive wife. In fact, Tyrell and I have already finalized our plans to help you adjust to this beautiful new chapter. We drove by your little Buckhead villa last Tuesday when you were out of town on that business trip to Chicago. Jordan led us inside to take a proper look around. We went ahead and picked out the master guest suite on the 2nd floor for our kids. The natural light in there is absolutely perfect for them." "Wait, what?" I stared at Tasha, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of her audacity. Jordan had let them into my home while I was traveling for work, my private sanctuary, the house I paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears, the property that possessed a state-of-the-art security system I thought only Jordan and I had access to. Tasha did not even pause to let me speak. "Oh, and do not worry about the guest bathroom on that floor," she continued, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "We are going to rip out those dark marble tiles. They are far too depressing and cold. We prefer a brighter aesthetic for our family. Since you will be staying home to cook, clean, and manage the household anyway, you will have plenty of time to oversee the contractors for us. We are moving our things in next Thursday, so make sure the closets are completely cleared out by then. Do not leave any of your old business suits in there, you will not be needing them anymore." Tyrell stepped forward, adjusting his rented bow tie with a smug expression. He looked at me with the unearned confidence of a man who had never successfully paid a utility bill on time. "And I am going to need you to completely empty out that home office of yours on the main floor," he dictated, pointing a thick finger at me as if I were his newly hired assistant. "Since my mother is taking over the family finances and you will not be working your little corporate job anymore, you do not need all that space. I need that room for my day trading setup. I have a massive crypto venture taking off and I need a quiet professional environment to monitor the markets. Your monitors and desk will work fine for now, so leave those plugged in. Just get all your personal files out of the drawers and wipe the hard drives clean by Monday." The sheer delusion radiating from Tyrell was almost physically suffocating. This was a 34-year-old man who currently drove a leased Maserati. He was 3 months behind on drowning in massive cryptocurrency debt and constantly begging Jordan for emergency loans to keep his internet running. And now he was standing in the middle of the St. Regis ballroom at a wedding reception I paid for, confidently explaining how he was going to commandeer my custom-built home office. they were not just trying to put me in my place, they were executing a hostile takeover of my entire life. They saw my hard-earned success not as something to be respected, but as a communal resource to be ruthlessly plundered. I stood there on the bottom step of the stage, the heavy tulle of my wedding gown, suddenly feeling like a restrictive straitjacket. My lungs burned as I took a slow, shallow breath. I looked past Tyrell and Tasha scanning the massive room. My tech industry colleagues from the venture capital firm were sitting at table 4, their mouths slightly open in profound shock. These were ruthless corporate negotiators who handled multi-million-dollar corporate mergers on a daily basis, and even they were stunned by the brazen daylight robbery happening right in front of them. My mother Elaine was still sitting at her table sipping her wine with a faint, recognizable look of quiet satisfaction on her face. She had always fiercely resented my independence, and seeing me being publicly broken down by my new in-laws probably felt like a personal victory to her. The horrifying reality of the situation crashed over me like an icy tidal wave. This was not a sudden misunderstanding. This was a meticulously coordinated ambush. Dolores reading the ridiculous rules on the microphone, Tasha boldly claiming my guest rooms, Tyrell, demanding my expensive office equipment. They had absolutely planned this. They had sat around a dinner table, probably eating expensive takeout paid for by Jordan, using my corporate credit card, and divided up my assets like spoils of war. They strategically waited until the wedding reception, assuming the immense public pressure and the judging eyes of their church congregation would force me into quiet submission. They calculated that I would be far too embarrassed to cause a massive scene in front of 200 people in a luxury hotel. They genuinely thought my deep unspoken desire to finally be loved and accepted by a family would override my basic self-respect. I refused to let them see me panic. I slowly turned my body away from Tyrell and Tasha's smug faces and looked back up the grand staircase toward the sweetheart table. Jordan was still sitting there, the man who had looked me directly in the eyes just a few hours ago and promised before God to protect me from the world. The man who had held my hands in his and spoken beautifully about building an equal powerful partnership. "Jordan," I said. My voice was dangerously low, but the microphone on the nearby podium picked up the sharp edge in my tone, carrying it softly across the silent room. "Jordan, your brother and his wife are telling me they are moving into my house next Thursday. They are telling me you gave them a private tour of my home while I was in Chicago securing a corporate buyout. Tell me right now that this is some kind of sick, twisted joke." I waited desperately for the punchline. I waited for him to stand up, laugh nervously, and tell his family they had gone way too far. I waited for the man I loved to prove he actually existed. Instead, Jordan let out a heavy, incredibly irritated sigh. He did not stand up. He did not rush to my side to defend my honor. He simply leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the expensive silk tablecloth, and looked down at me with an expression of sheer annoyance. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, took another deliberate sip of his expensive Hennessy, and shot me a glare that made my blood run absolutely cold. "Babe, please do not do this right now," Jordan whispered harshly, though the utter silence in the room made his voice carry much further than he intended. "Do not make a massive scene in front of the pastor and all of our friends. You are embarrassing yourself and making us look bad. We already discussed sharing our blessings when we got married. Tyrell and Tasha are going through a really hard time with their landlord right now, and we have a massive house with plenty of empty rooms. It is only right that we step up and help them out. You have always been so selfish with your space. You need to learn how to be part of a real community. Just go over there, apologize to my mother for glaring at her, and accept the family directives. It is not a big deal." Not a big deal. The words echoed relentlessly in my mind, ringing with a terrifying clarity. My husband had just handed over the keys to my $2.5 million property without my permission. He had silently agreed to let his mother seize total control of the financial portfolio I had spent a decade building. He was actively encouraging his entitled siblings to invade my sanctuary. And when I dared to question this massive violation of my life and property, he called me selfish. He was trying to gaslight me into surrendering my entire existence. The trap had been expertly set, the cage door had been slammed closed, and Jordan was standing there holding the padlock. He looked at me not with the loving eyes of a newlywed husband, but with the cold, calculating stare of a warden expecting a prisoner to fall in line. I realized in that shattering moment that he had never loved me. He loved what I could provide for him and his parasitic family. He loved the luxury vacations, the designer suits, and the pristine image of being a successful power couple, all while secretly planning to strip me of everything that made me powerful. The man I had walked down the aisle toward was nothing more than a well-dressed illusion, a Trojan horse designed to infiltrate my carefully guarded life and open the gates for his greedy relatives to storm the castle. They genuinely believed I was trapped. They believed the marriage certificate we were scheduled to sign officially the next morning was already a binding chain around my neck. They were wrong. I did not scream. I did not throw my champagne glass at Tyrell or slap the smug grin off Tasha's face. Instead, I turned back to my husband. I reached down, grabbed Jordan by the forearm, and my manicured nails dug into his expensive tuxedo jacket with the force of a steel trap. I plastered on a bright, tight smile for the hundreds of guests watching our every move. "Excuse us for just one moment," I announced cheerfully, projecting my voice so the nearest tables could hear. "Jordan and I need to discuss a quick wardrobe change." Before he could protest or pull away, I yanked him up from his chair. I marched him off the elevated stage, dragging him past my stunned corporate colleagues and his whispering relatives. We moved swiftly across the ballroom floor, pushing through the heavy velvet curtains that separated the reception area from the private bridal suite. Once we were inside the opulent room, I slammed the heavy oak door shut behind us. The thick wood instantly muffled the murmurs of the crowd outside, leaving us in a tense, suffocating silence. I let go of his arm and stepped back, staring at the man I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. "Explain," I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of pure rage and absolute heartbreak. "Explain to me why your brother thinks he is taking over my home office for his failed day trading schemes. Explain to me why your sister-in-law believes she is moving her children into my guest bedrooms next Thursday. Explain to me why your mother is currently standing on a stage with a laminated piece of paper, demanding I quit my job and surrender my life savings to her control." Jordan did not look apologetic. He did not look ashamed. He walked casually over to the small minibar in the corner of the bridal suite, picked up a crystal decanter, and poured himself another glass of bourbon. He took his time, deliberately ignoring my questions to assert his dominance in the room. When he finally turned to face me, his expression was a mask of cold condescension. "Charmaine, you are being completely hysterical right now," Jordan said, rolling his eyes as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "You need to lower your voice and calm down before someone hears you. You are completely overreacting to a beautiful family tradition. My mother is simply trying to welcome you into the fold and give you the guidance you desperately need." Guidance. I repeated the word, tasting like acid on my tongue. She just ordered me to quit my career as a senior vice president. She just demanded my corporate investments. Tasha just told me she is tearing up my imported marble floors. That is not guidance, Jordan. That is a hostile takeover of my entire existence. Jordan sighed heavily, leaning against the minibar and crossing his ankles. "This is exactly what I mean about your attitude." He lectured, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "You have this massive chip on your shoulder because of how you grew up in Connecticut. You are so fiercely independent that you have become entirely selfish. Marriage is about sacrifice, Charmaine. It is about submission. It is about blending our lives. Tyrell and Tasha are going through a brutal eviction right now. They have nowhere else to go. We have a massive $2.5 million villa with empty rooms just collecting dust. Are we really going to let my own flesh and blood sleep on the street when you have thousands of square feet of unused space?" I stared at him, my mind spinning as I realized the depths of his manipulation. "I am not responsible for Tyrell leasing a luxury car he cannot afford," I fired back, stepping closer to him. "And I am certainly not responsible for his massive cryptocurrency debts. I worked 80-hour weeks for 10 straight years to buy that house. I missed holidays, I sacrificed relationships, and I built my wealth from the ground up. I am not running a charity for your financially irresponsible relatives. And how did Tasha even get inside my house to look at the guest rooms while I was in Chicago? I never gave them a key. The security system requires a master passcode. Jordan took a slow sip of his bourbon, completely unbothered by my rising panic. I gave my mother the master security codes 3 days ago, he admitted casually, as if he were telling me he had picked up the dry cleaning. She needed access so she could let the contractors inside to start measuring the guest bathroom for the renovations Tasha wanted. Plus, my mother needs to be able to come and go as she pleases. That house is not just your little bachelor pad anymore, Charmaine. It is our family headquarters now. The room seemed to violently spin around me. He gave them the security codes. He compromised the physical safety of my sanctuary. The very home I bought to protect myself from the world was now entirely accessible to a family of predators, all orchestrated by the man who swore to protect me. I felt a physical pain radiating in my chest as a horrifying realization finally snapped into perfect focus. I looked at Jordan, really looked at him, and replayed the last 12 months of our relationship in my head. Suddenly, every late-night conversation we ever had took on a sinister, sickening new meaning. When we sat on my balcony overlooking the Atlanta skyline drinking wine and talking about our future, Jordan would always give these passionate, captivating speeches about building an empire together. He would talk endlessly about generational wealth, about lifting up the community, about breaking the cycle of poverty for the modern Black family. I had been so utterly captivated by his vision. I thought he was talking about us. I thought he meant he and I were going to combine our ambitions, support each other's careers, and build a beautiful, secure life for our future children. But as I stood in this bridal suite staring at his smug, entitled face, I realized I had completely mistranslated his intentions. When Jordan talked about building an empire, he meant I was going to be the sole financier of his existing family's extravagant lifestyle. When he talked about generational wealth, he meant taking the massive venture capital bonuses I earned and using them to bail out his mother's foreclosed townhouse in Decatur. He never had any intention of building anything with me. He only intended to harvest me. "You lied to me," I whispered the devastating truth, stripping the anger from my voice and replacing it with a cold, terrifying clarity. "You never wanted an equal partner. You wanted a corporate sponsor. You saw my job title. You saw my house. You saw my investment portfolio. And you figured out a way to legally bind my assets to your family's debts. That is why you pushed so hard for a quick engagement. That is why you insisted we did not need a prenuptial agreement, because it would ruin the spiritual bond of our union." Jordan slammed his bourbon glass down on the marble counter, the sharp crack echoing in the small room. His charming facade completely vanished, replaced by a vicious, ugly sneer. "Do not stand there and play the victim, Charmaine," he snapped, stepping toward me aggressively. "You knew exactly who I was when you agreed to marry me. I am a family man. My loyalty belongs to my blood. You have all this money and absolutely no idea how to be a real woman. You think your corporate title makes you special. It makes you hardened. It makes you unlovable. My mother is willing to teach you how to be a proper submissive wife who actually respects the family structure. You should be down on your knees thanking her for intervening before your arrogance ruins this marriage." I stood my ground as he loomed over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into backing down. He was using every textbook gaslighting tactic in existence. He was attacking my femininity, invalidating my hard work, and projecting his family's greed onto me by calling me selfish. He wanted me to feel so insecure, so terrified of losing his love, that I would willingly hand over the keys to my kingdom just to keep the peace. "So this is the deal," Jordan demanded, pointing his finger directly in my face. "You are going to fix your attitude right now. We are going to walk back out into that ballroom together. You are going to take the microphone, apologize to my mother for your disrespectful glare, and publicly accept the family directives. Then we are going to enjoy the rest of this reception. Next week, Tyrell and Tasha will move in and you will help them get settled. If you cannot do that, if you cannot submit to my leadership and respect my family, then I do not know how we are going to make this marriage work." He delivered the ultimatum with total confidence, fully believing he held all the power. He thought the threat of a cancelled wedding, the fear of public embarrassment, and the sheer pressure of 200 guests waiting outside would break me. He thought I was just another weak link he could bully into submission. He thought my desire for a family would blind me to the reality of his financial abuse. He thought he had me completely backed into a corner with absolutely no way out. But Jordan Banks had drastically underestimated the woman standing in front of him. He forgot that I built my career dismantling hostile takeovers, identifying corporate liabilities, and ruthlessly cutting dead weight from sinking companies. And looking at my husband right now, all I saw was a massive liability. I did not shed a single tear. Women like me do not cry over bad investments, we simply liquidate them. I looked at Jordan one last time, taking in the sight of the man I almost allowed to completely ruin my life. He was still standing casually by the minibar, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride, fully expecting me to break down, submit, and apologize for challenging his authority. Instead, I slowly reached up and adjusted the diamond necklace resting against my collarbone. I smoothed down the heavy silk skirt of my custom Vera Wang gown, ensuring every fold fell perfectly into place. I rolled my shoulders back, lifting my chin to the exact angle I used when entering a hostile boardroom to announce a massive corporate restructuring. I did not say another word to him. I simply turned on my satin heel, grasped the brass handle of the heavy oak door, and pulled it open without looking back. I stepped out of the private bridal suite and walked back into the main reception hall. The atmosphere in the massive St. Regis ballroom had shifted drastically since I left. The low, tense hum of hundreds of guests whispering to one another filled the air. The string quartet had resumed playing softly in the corner, trying their absolute best to mask the awkward tension that had settled over the room like a thick, suffocating fog. I walked purposefully across the polished marble perimeter, my eyes carefully scanning the beautifully decorated space to assess the battlefield. At the main family table, Dolores was holding court, as if she had just conquered a small nation. She was laughing loudly, leaning over to clink her champagne glass with her sister Auntie Brenda. Dolores looked incredibly smug, radiating the toxic satisfaction of a woman who genuinely believed she had just publicly humbled a younger, more successful rival. Tyrell and Tasha were back at their seats, aggressively piling high-end catered seafood onto their plates, whispering conspiratorially to each other with hungry smiles. They probably thought they were celebrating their newly acquired real estate. My own mother, Elaine, caught my eye from across the room. She offered a slight knowing nod, fully expecting me to walk back to my seat in utter defeat, broken and domesticated, just like she had always wanted. They all thought the show was over. They had absolutely no idea the main event was just about to begin. I completely bypassed the sweetheart table where Jordan and I were supposed to be sitting. Instead, I walked directly toward the elevated DJ booth set up near the massive crystal chandeliers. The DJ, a young guy I had hired specifically for his high-energy mixes, looked at me with wide, panicked eyes as I approached. He had clearly witnessed the entire humiliating display with the laminated rules and had absolutely no idea what was happening. I did not give him a chance to ask questions. I stepped up to his table, looked him dead in the eye, and dragged my index finger across my throat in a swift, sharp cutting motion. "Cut the music," I ordered calmly. The DJ scrambled frantically to hit the master switch. The soft, elegant string melody was instantly severed, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in its wake. The abrupt cessation of the music was like a physical shockwave moving through the massive room. 200 heads immediately snapped in my direction. The whispers died instantly. The clinking of silverware against fine china completely stopped. The entire St. Regis ballroom held its collective breath, waiting to see what the humiliated bride was going to do next. I walked slowly and deliberately to the center of the dance floor. The bright spotlight overhead caught the intricate beadwork of my gown, making it shimmer brilliantly with every calculated step I took. I reached out and took the heavy silver microphone from the floor stand. I tapped it twice. The sharp, booming thud echoed loudly through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, confirming I had the absolute undivided attention of every single person in the room. Dolores finally stopped smiling. She sat up straight in her chair, her heavily beaded silver gown sparkling under the lights. She looked at me with a mixture of sudden confusion and rising irritation. She clearly expected me to be walking out with Jordan by my side, ready to deliver a tearful, submissive apology to the family. Seeing me standing alone in the center of the room holding the microphone with the confident iron grip of an executive clearly unsettled her. I looked directly at her and smiled. It was not a warm bridal smile. It was the terrifying razor-sharp smile of a corporate predator that had just locked onto its prey. "Thank you all for your patience," I began, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with absolute authority across the silent ballroom. I know my new mother-in-law Dolores delivered quite an unconventional speech a few moments ago. I must admit I was deeply moved by her passionate dedication to the bank's family legacy. So moved, in fact, that I felt it was absolutely necessary to come out here and address her beautiful family directives immediately. A collective murmur rippled through the tables where my tech industry colleagues were seated. My coworkers knew that exact tone. It was the precise, calm tone I always used right before I dismantled a failing startup in a ruthless boardroom meeting. They leaned forward, their eyes locked on the unfolding drama. I took a slow step toward the bank's family table, keeping my eyes firmly locked on Dolores. Her jaw tightened, and I could see the sudden flash of uncertainty in her eyes. "I want to talk specifically about rule number 2. I continued pacing slowly across the polished wooden floor. "The rule regarding the immediate consolidation of my financial portfolio, my savings accounts, my corporate investments, and my real estate holdings into the newly formed bank's family trust." I paused, letting the sheer weight of her ridiculous, greedy demands hang in the air for a second time. Dolores shifted uncomfortably in her seat, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. Tyrell stopped chewing his lobster, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. Tasha looked at me with narrowed eyes, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. "Now, Dolores," I said, raising my free hand in a gesture of innocent curiosity. "I just want to make sure I am fully understanding the vast responsibilities that come with this incredible financial transition. You mentioned that as the elder matriarch, you will personally oversee and manage this trust to ensure fairness and transparency when times get tough for the family. That is a massive undertaking. Managing millions of dollars in liquid assets and prime real estate requires a very specific level of financial literacy, a flawless track record, and impeccable credit." I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of her table. Dolores was staring at me, her chest heaving slightly beneath her extravagant dress. "What are you doing, Charmaine?" she hissed under her breath, desperately trying to keep her voice low enough so the microphone would not pick it up. "Sit down right now before you ruin this beautiful night." But I was just getting started. "So my main question is this, Dolores," I announced loudly, making sure the microphone captured every single syllable with perfect, devastating clarity. "If I am handing over the entire sum of my life savings to your exclusive management, does that mean you are finally going to use my venture capital bonuses to pay off your own foreclosed townhouse in Decatur? Or are you planning to let the bank formally evict you next Tuesday as scheduled?" The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. A massive collective gasp erupted from the 200 guests. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Several people actually dropped their heavy silver forks onto their plates with a loud clatter. Auntie Brenda knocked over her crystal champagne flute, sending golden liquid spilling rapidly across the white silk tablecloth. My mother Elaine sat completely frozen, her wine glass suspended halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute disbelief. The perfectly crafted illusion of the wealthy, prominent Banks family had just been violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of their entire church congregation. Dolores turned an alarming shade of gray. The smug, arrogant expression melted off her face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, paralyzing horror. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air on dry land. She looked frantically around the room, realizing that every single person she had spent years trying to impress had just heard her deepest, darkest financial secret broadcasted over a microphone. Yes, I continued loudly, projecting my voice over the rising tide of shocked whispers, driving the final nail into the coffin of her pristine reputation. I received the public property records during a standard background check I run on all major investments. It appears the bank has been trying to collect on your defaulted mortgage for over 14 months. So before I transfer my $2.5 million asset portfolio into the bank's family trust, I just need a little clarification on whether my hard-earned money is going to fund your retirement, or if it is just going to bail you out of total bankruptcy. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely magnificent. I stood there in my custom wedding dress, holding the microphone tightly in my hand, entirely in control of the destruction I had just unleashed. I was not the naive girl seeking approval anymore. I was the architect of their absolute ruin, and I was going to tear down their fake empire brick by brick. Dolores's face transformed from a sickly gray to a deep, violently mottled shade of purple. The veins in her neck bulged visibly against her heavy silver necklace as she struggled to form a single coherent sentence. She looked like a woman who had just stepped on a landmine that she herself had planted. For years, she had paraded around our church community and the greater Atlanta area as a matriarch of immense wealth and profound wisdom. She had judged other women for their financial struggles, preaching from her high horse about the undeniable power of the bank's family legacy. Now, her most closely guarded secret, the terrifying reality of her impending eviction, was hanging heavily in the air of a luxury ballroom exposed by the very woman she had just tried to humiliate. The suffocating silence of the room was suddenly broken by the sound of a chair violently scraping against the marble floor. Tyrell shot up from his seat, slamming both of his hands down on the table with such excessive force that his crystal water glass tipped over, spilling ice and water across the pristine white silk tablecloth. His face was twisted in a mask of absolute unhinged fury. "How dare you speak to my mother that way?" he bellowed, his deep voice vibrating aggressively through the silent hall. "Who do you think you are, Charmaine? You stand up there in front of our entire family, our lifelong friends and our pastor, and you disrespect the woman who graciously offered to welcome you into our home. You are a guest in this family. You should be down on your knees thanking her for trying to guide you. Put that microphone down right now and apologize to her before I come up there and make you." He stepped away from the table, taking 2 large, aggressive strides toward the center of the dance floor where I stood. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his height and his physical presence to intimidate me into backing down. Tasha grabbed his arm, pulling him back slightly, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she realized that causing a physical altercation at a high society event would only worsen their rapidly deteriorating public image. But Tyrell shook her off. He was entirely consumed by the desperate need to perform his role as the protective dominant male of the family, completely ignoring the fact that his authority was built on a foundation of absolute lies. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I tightened my grip on the microphone and looked him directly in the eyes, letting a cold, humorless laugh escape my lips. The sound amplified through the speakers, cutting through his aggressive posturing like a freshly sharpened blade. "Make me apologize, Tyrell," I asked, my tone dripping with pure, concentrated venom. "Are you really going to stand there and enforce these fake family rules? That is incredibly bold coming from a man who had to secretly borrow gas money from his little brother just to drive here tonight." Tyrell froze mid-step. His jaw clenched tightly and a flicker of genuine panic crossed his sharp features. "You love to talk about being a provider, Tyrell?" I continued pacing slowly across the floor, addressing the entire room, while keeping my eyes firmly locked on him. "You drove up to the valet stand tonight in that beautiful, sleek black Maserati. You made sure everybody saw you step out of it. Tasha made sure to loudly tell my mother about your incredible success in the cryptocurrency market during the cocktail hour. But you conveniently forgot to mention that the luxury car is leased, and you are currently 3 months behind on the payments. In fact, the dealership sent a final repossession warning to Jordan's email address last Thursday because you desperately used him as a financial guarantor without telling me. Tasha let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, slapping her hand over her mouth as the surrounding guests began to murmur loudly. Tyrell's face instantly drained of color, his aggressive posture collapsing as if I had physically struck him. "Shut up!" he hissed, his voice dropping an octave as he looked frantically around at the judging faces of his wealthy relatives. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are making things up." But I was not going to stop. "I am a senior vice president of acquisitions, Tyrell." I reminded him, my voice echoing with absolute, unwavering authority. "My entire career is based on identifying fraudulent assets, auditing failing companies, and exposing terrible investments. Did you honestly think I was going to legally bind myself to your family without running a comprehensive financial background check on every single one of you?" I took another deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. "Let us talk about your massive crypto venture taking off," I said, raising my voice so it reached the very back of the ballroom. "Let us talk about how you demanded my custom home office to monitor the financial markets. The brutal truth is, you do not need an office, Tyrell. You need a miracle. Because according to the federal tax liens filed against you in Fulton County last month, you currently owe the Internal Revenue Service exactly $80,000 in unpaid back taxes. You have absolutely no liquid assets, no savings account, and zero viable income. The only reason you are trying to move your wife and children into my house next Thursday is because your landlord formally initiated eviction proceedings against you yesterday morning." The St. Regis ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The sophisticated veneer of the elegant reception completely vanished in an instant. Aunts and cousins, who had previously looked at me with smug disdain, were now staring at Tyrell and Tasha with wide, horrified eyes. The murmurs swelled into loud, frantic conversations that echoed off the high ceilings. The sheer scale of the deception was almost impossible for the guests to process. In less than 5 minutes, the wealthy, prominent Banks family had been thoroughly exposed as a collection of desperate, deeply indebted frauds. Tasha sank back into her chair, her face buried in her trembling hands, completely humiliated. Tyrell stood rooted to the exact spot on the dance floor, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly, entirely unable to formulate a single word of defense against the cold, hard documented facts I had just delivered. "You all sit here in your expensive rented clothes and demand my respect." I continued, pointing a manicured finger directly at Dolores, who was still gasping for air at the main table. "You demand my absolute submission. You demand my life savings. But none of you have absolutely any idea what it actually takes to build real wealth. For 10 straight years, I clawed my way up the corporate ladder. I did not take luxury vacations. I did not buy designer clothes. I lived in a tiny, cramped 400-square-foot studio apartment with terrible heating. I ate cheap ramen noodles for dinner 5 nights a week while working 80-hour shifts to prove my worth in a ruthless, male-dominated industry. I cried out of sheer exhaustion on the subway rides home. I battled severe burnout, constantly fighting against a corporate system that wanted to see me fail. I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my personal life to secure my financial independence. Every single dollar in my portfolio is soaked in my sweat, my tears, and my relentless determination. "And what exactly were you two doing during those 10 long years?" I asked, shifting my unyielding gaze between Tyrell and the empty space where Jordan was supposed to be sitting. "I will tell you exactly what you were doing. You were living comfortably under your mother's roof, playing the role of successful businessmen, while secretly draining her completely dry. Every time Tyrell launched a failed business scheme, Dolores bailed him out. Jordan was driving luxury vehicles he could not afford, throwing expensive community galas to look like a hero, all while quietly shifting his massive personal debt onto his mother's crumbling shoulders." I looked back at Dolores, who was now weeping genuine tears of profound embarrassment. She covered her face with her hands, but I refused to let her hide. I wanted her to feel the exact same public humiliation she had gleefully attempted to inflict upon me. "You ruined your own life to spoil your entitled son's, Dolores," I stated coldly, showing absolutely no mercy for her tears. You took out predatory high-interest secondary loans against your beautiful townhouse in Decatur just to fund their lavish fake lifestyles. You dug a massive financial grave for yourself, and instead of holding your grown children accountable, you enabled their incredibly toxic financial habits. You taught them that they never had to work hard because there would always be someone else to foot the bill. And then Jordan found me, I said, my voice dripping with profound, undeniable disgust. He saw a woman who was desperate for a loving family. He saw a woman with a massive venture capital bonus, a pristine credit score, and a beautiful fully paid-off villa in Buckhead. He realized that the well at home had finally run completely dry, so he sought out a brand new water source to keep the family afloat. That is what this entire night is really about. That is what your ridiculous Banks Family Directives for Wives truly means. The Banks Family Trust does not exist to build a legacy, I announced to the captive audience, my voice ringing with undeniable truth. It exists to serve as a massive, legally binding slush fund to pay off Tyrell's federal tax evasion charges, to cover Tasha's luxury shopping habits, and to stop the bank from seizing Dolores's home next Tuesday. You did not want a daughter-in-law to love and cherish. You wanted a corporate sponsor to bail out your bankrupt existence. You wanted a financial hostage. I lowered the microphone slightly, letting my devastating words settle heavily over the room. I had stripped away their masks, exposed their rotting foundation, and laid their deepest shames bare for their entire community to see. I expected them to finally retreat in absolute disgrace. I expected them to drop their heads, gather their things, and walk out of my reception hall in complete silence. But I had drastically underestimated the sheer terrifying power of their collective delusion. I had underestimated how violently a cornered pack of predators will fight when their primary food source threatens to walk away. The collective shock that had briefly paralyzed the Banks family quickly curdled into a vicious defensive rage. They were not going to let an outsider dismantle the fragile illusion of their superiority without a brutal fight. The initial gasps of horror from the extended relatives sitting at the surrounding tables morphed into loud, aggressive muttering, which rapidly escalated into outright shouting. Chairs scraped harshly against the marble floor as several older aunts and male cousins pushed themselves up their faces, contorted in furious indignation. They were operating on a deeply ingrained pack mentality, aggressively circling the wagons to protect their matriarch, completely ignoring the blatant financial fraud I had just exposed. Auntie Brenda, a formidable woman wearing a violently bright yellow dress and a hat that defied gravity, was the first to openly launch a counterattack. She marched aggressively past my stunned corporate colleagues, pointing a thick, heavily ringed finger directly at me. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Charmaine," she bellowed, her voice easily, projecting over the rising chaos in the ballroom. "You stand up there in your expensive white dress, acting like you are better than everybody else just because you have a fancy job title. You are supposed to lift your husband up. A real black woman holds her man's family down when they are struggling. She does not stand on a stage and humiliate her elders in front of the entire congregation. You are completely out of line, little girl." A chorus of loud agreements and aggressive amens erupted from the other Banks relatives. A tall, broad-shouldered cousin named Marcus, whom I had only met briefly at the rehearsal dinner, pushed his way to the front of the growing crowd. He glared at me with absolute contempt, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "That is exactly right," he shouted, his deep voice adding a threatening layer to the escalating confrontation. "You come into this family flashing your corporate money trying to buy our respect, and then you disrespect Aunt Dolores like this. That money means absolutely nothing if you do not have respect for the culture and the family structure. You need to put that microphone down. Get off that dance floor and apologize to her right now before things get seriously ugly." The sheer audacity of their demands was almost comical, but the physical threat they were rapidly presenting was very real. About 15 members of the bank's extended family had abandoned their tables and were actively moving toward the center of the room. They were not just yelling anymore, they were physically surrounding the area where I stood near the sweetheart table. They formed a tight, aggressive semicircle, effectively cutting off my path to the main exit. They were using their numbers and their volume to intimidate me, trying to bully me into immediate submission. They genuinely believed that if they yelled loud enough, if they invoked the sacred concepts of family loyalty and cultural tradition, I would simply fold under the immense pressure and surrender to their demands. My own mother, Elaine, finally stood up from her table. For a fleeting second, a tiny, foolish part of me hoped she might actually step forward to defend her daughter from an angry mob. Instead, she smoothed down her elegant navy dress, picked up her designer clutch, and looked at me with an expression of profound disappointment. "I told you this independence of yours would eventually ruin you, Charmaine," she called out coldly, ensuring her voice carried over the din. "You have successfully embarrassed everyone in this room tonight. I am not going to sit here and watch you destroy your own wedding with your unbearable arrogance." She turned her back on me and calmly walked toward the exit, completely abandoning me to face the hostile crowd alone. Her departure seemed to embolden the Banks family even further, signaling to them that I was completely isolated and unprotected. The shouting grew louder, a chaotic mix of demands, insults, and aggressive posturing. "Hand over the microphone," Tasha shrieked from behind the safety of Tyrell's broad back. "You have done enough damage for one night. Just admit you are a selfish, money-hungry corporate drone and apologize." Through the deafening noise and the sea of angry faces, my eyes locked onto the one person who had the power to stop this entire nightmare. Jordan, my husband. The man who had promised to stand by my side against the world. He was still sitting at the sweetheart table, safely elevated above the angry crowd on the dance floor. He had watched his mother try to steal my assets. He had watched his brother try to commandeer my home. He had watched his entire extended family physically surround me, screaming insults and threatening me. And he had done absolutely nothing. Finally, Jordan placed his empty glass of Hennessy down on the table. He stood up slowly, deliberately, buttoning his suit jacket. The crowd of his relatives parted slightly, granting him a clear path as he walked down the steps toward me. A sudden tense hush fell over the ballroom. Even Auntie Brenda stopped yelling, stepping back to let the supposed head of the household handle his unruly bride. Everyone waited with bated breath, expecting him to deliver the final crushing blow that would force me to my knees. Jordan stopped a few feet away from me. He looked at the angry faces of his family members, then looked directly into my eyes. His expression was not one of a protective partner. It was the cold, detached look of an irritated manager dealing with an insubordinate employee who was disrupting a very important presentation. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not acknowledge the blatant financial ambush his mother had just attempted. He simply crossed his arms and delivered his final ultimatum. "I told you to stop making a scene," Charmaine Jordan said, his voice deadly quiet, but carrying a terrifying edge of absolute authority. "You have completely embarrassed my mother, you have disrespected my brother, and you have insulted this entire family. I am not going to stand here and let you ruin our reputation because you are too arrogant to understand the meaning of sacrifice. So this is what is going to happen right now. You are going to hand that microphone to me. You are going to walk over to that table. And you are going to apologize to my mother in front of every single person in this room." I stared at him, my grip tightening on the heavy metal of the microphone until my knuckles turned completely white. "You want me to apologize to the woman who just tried to steal my life savings to pay off her own defaulted mortgage?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, vibrating with a suppressed fury that I could barely contain. "You want me to apologize to the brother who is trying to move his family into my home because he is being evicted for massive tax fraud?" "Yes," Jordan snapped instantly, entirely dismissing the devastating facts I had just laid out. "Because they are my family. Because you are my wife, and your duty is to support us, not to audit us like we are one of your failing tech companies. We are a team now, Charmaine. What is yours is ours. If you cannot accept that, if you cannot humble yourself and apologize right now, then I am walking out those doors, and this marriage is completely over before it even begins." He threw down the gauntlet, fully expecting me to crumble. He thought the ultimate threat of abandonment, The fear of being left at the altar in front of 200 people would be the final lever he needed to break my spirit. He was banking on the deep, unspoken desperation I had carried since childhood, the desperate need to be chosen and loved to override my logic and self-preservation. He thought I would rather be a financial hostage than be alone. The extended family murmured in loud agreement, nodding approvingly at his strong, masculine display of dominance. They were all waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the successful, independent woman to finally bow her hand over her hard-earned wealth and accept her assigned place at the bottom of their toxic hierarchy. I stared at Jordan, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of his ultimate threat wash over me. He stood there with his chest puffed out, an arrogant scowl plastered across his handsome face, genuinely believing he had just delivered the winning blow. He thought the prospect of him walking out of the St. Regis ballroom, leaving me at the altar in front of my corporate colleagues and his judging family, would shatter my resolve. He thought I was terrified of being abandoned. He thought I was desperate. For a long, agonizing moment, I did absolutely nothing. I just looked at him, studying the man I had almost tethered my entire life and fortune to. And then a sound bubbled up from deep within my chest. It started as a soft chuckle escaping my lips before I could even try to stop it. The chuckle quickly grew, echoing through the quiet microphone I still held in my hand, until it evolved into a full, genuine, echoing laugh. It was not a hysterical laugh. It was the rich, deeply satisfied laugh of a woman who had just watched a child try to threaten her with a plastic toy sword. The sound of my laughter completely shattered Jordan's carefully constructed alpha male facade. His arrogant scowl faltered, replaced by a flash of deep, unsettling confusion. His extended family, who had just been aggressively cheering him on, suddenly fell completely silent again, exchanging uncertain glances. They had expected me to cry. They had expected me to beg. They had absolutely no idea how to process a woman laughing directly in the face of their supposedly powerful patriarch. "Walk out," I asked, my voice ringing with pure, unadulterated amusement as I shook my head in disbelief. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, closing the distance until I could see the nervous twitch in his jaw. "You are going to walk out, Jordan." That is a brilliantly dramatic exit strategy, but I have to ask a very practical question. How exactly do you plan on getting home, because you certainly do not have a car to drive away in? Jordan's face hardened instantly, his eyes narrowing into furious slits. "What are you talking about, Charmaine?" he snapped, trying to maintain his authoritative tone but failing to hide the slight tremor of panic in his voice. "I drove here in the G-Wagon. The valet has the keys right outside. Do not try to play crazy with me just because you are losing this argument." I smiled, the kind of smile that made grown men in corporate boardrooms sweat. "Oh, I know you drove the Mercedes G-Wagon here tonight," I replied smoothly, projecting every single word over the state-of-the-art sound system. "It is a beautiful vehicle, matte black custom interior, absolutely top of the line. You have spent the last 6 months driving it all over Atlanta, showing it off to your nonprofit board members, and letting Tyrell borrow it to look rich. You love telling everyone that it is a symbol of the massive success you have built. But you and I both know the brutal, humiliating truth about that car, Jordan." I turned my body slightly so I could address both him and his stunned family members, ensuring everyone had a front row seat to his absolute destruction. "That car does not belong to you," I announced, clearly my voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Your name is not on the title, your name is not on the registration, and your name is certainly not on the monthly insurance policy. That $160,000 vehicle is legally registered to a corporate entity called St. James Holdings. And St. James Holdings is a private limited liability company that I entirely own and operate. You are not a wealthy man, Jordan. You are just a man driving his girlfriend's company car." The ballroom erupted in another massive wave of gasps and frantic whispers. The sheer humiliation of the reveal hit the Banks family like a physical blow. In their culture, in their strict adherence to traditional gender roles and masculine pride, a man being entirely financially subsidized by his partner was the ultimate disgrace. Jordan, the man who had just demanded my total submission. The man who had ordered me to hand over my wealth to his bankrupt mother was suddenly exposed as nothing more than a dependent living on my corporate dime. Jordan physically recoiled, taking a stumbling step backward as if I had shoved him. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very small. He looked desperately around the room, making eye contact with his proud cousin Marcus and his demanding Auntie Brenda, watching their expressions of admiration morph instantly into looks of profound shock and pity. He had built his entire identity within his family as a provider, a savior, and a highly successful businessman. In 30 seconds, I had stripped away his fake armor and exposed him as a total fraud. "Shut up," Jordan hissed, stepping toward me with his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his voice trembling with humiliated rage. "Shut your mouth right now, Charmaine. You are lying. I make the payments on that car. I put the gas in it. You are trying to humiliate me in front of my people. You make the payments using the joint checking account that is funded entirely by my direct deposits." I corrected him coldly, completely unfazed by his anger. "I transferred the funds, Jordan. I paid the down payment. I hold the title in my safe. And since you just threatened to walk out on this relationship, I am officially revoking your access to company property. The valet has already been instructed to hand the keys over to my hired security team. So if you are planning to make a dramatic exit tonight, I highly suggest you open up your phone and call an Uber. But make sure you use your own credit card because I disabled your personal access to my accounts 10 minutes ago while we were standing in the bridal suite." Jordan stood absolutely frozen, his mouth hanging open, his carefully crafted world completely disintegrating around him. He had absolutely no leverage left. He had no money, no car, and no authority. The family that had been aggressively backing him up just moments ago was now staring at him in stunned silence, realizing that their golden child was completely broke. But the delusion in the Banks family ran incredibly deep. Before Jordan could even attempt to formulate a pathetic response, a shrill, desperate voice cut through the heavy atmosphere of the room. It was Tasha. She pushed her way past Tyrell, stepping aggressively out of the crowd and pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are a vicious, evil woman," Tasha screamed, her face flushed with a mixture of profound embarrassment and furious entitlement. "You think you are so smart, exposing everybody's finances and taking back a stupid car. You think you can just embarrass us and leave us with nothing? Fine. Take your little company car. We do not care about the Mercedes. Because you still have the villa." She took a step closer to me, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate kind of greed. She was completely ignoring the reality of the situation, clinging frantically to the one asset she thought she had already secured. "Jordan gave us the security codes," she shouted, making sure the entire room heard her claim. "He is your husband. What is yours is his. And he promised us that house. We are packing up our apartment this weekend, and we are moving our kids into those guest rooms next Thursday, whether you like it or not. You cannot legally keep us out of our own family headquarters. You have to share your blessings." I slowly turned my head away from Jordan and locked my gaze onto Tasha. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from her was almost fascinating to witness. She was standing in the middle of a luxury hotel, wearing a dress she absolutely could not afford, aggressively demanding the keys to a $2.5 million mansion that I had paid for with 10 years of my own blood, sweat, and tears. She genuinely believed that because she married Jordan's deadbeat brother, she was somehow magically entitled to the fruits of my grueling corporate labor. I looked at Tasha with pure, terrifying eyes. All the amusement I had felt moments ago completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating determination to end this hostile takeover once and for all. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell back at her. I simply reached into the hidden pocket of my custom Vera Wang gown and pulled out my smartphone. "You want to talk about legalities, Tasha?" I asked softly, my voice carrying a lethal edge that made her take a sudden involuntary step back. "You want to talk about what you think Jordan has the authority to give away? That is a fantastic topic. Let us look at the actual paperwork." I turned my attention to the elevated DJ booth located just a few yards away. The DJ was still standing there watching the unfolding family drama with wide, completely captivated eyes. Earlier in the evening, during the cocktail hour, we had used a massive drop-down projector screen behind the dance floor to display a beautiful slideshow of Jordan and me. The projector was still on, casting a blank, bright white square of light against the far wall. "Connect my phone to the main projector," I ordered the DJ, my voice sharp and commanding. "Use the wireless casting network. Do it right now." The DJ nodded frantically, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. Within seconds, a small ping echoed through the sound system, and my smartphone screen was suddenly mirrored onto the massive 20-foot projector screen hanging behind me. The bright light illuminated the shocked faces of the Banks family members who had surrounded me. They all turned their heads, squinting up at the giant screen, having absolutely no idea what I was about to show them. I unlocked my phone, opened my secure legal files application, and tapped on a specific highly confidential document. The file loaded instantly, filling the massive screen with crisp, black legal text, official state seals, and notarized signatures. I zoomed in on the first page, specifically highlighting the bold capitalized headers that detailed the exact ownership structure of the property in question. I turned back to Tasha, who was staring up at the screen with a look of deep, mounting confusion. She did not understand corporate law, but she could sense that whatever was written on that wall was about to completely destroy her plans. Tyrell moved to stand beside her, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, his face growing paler by the second. Dolores had completely stopped crying, her gaze fixed on the bright screen, realizing that I had laid a trap far more sophisticated than anything she could have ever comprehended. "You claim Jordan promised you my house," I said, my voice echoing powerfully through the silent ballroom. "You claim he gave you the security codes, and that as my husband he has the legal right to surrender my property to his family. Well, Tasha, let me introduce you to the reality of modern asset protection." I raised my free hand, pointing directly at the massive document displayed on the wall behind me. I had prepared for this exact moment. I had prepared for every single worst-case scenario, because surviving in a ruthless corporate world taught me never to leave my assets unprotected. The Banks family had walked blindly into my domain, fully expecting a slaughter, without realizing they were the ones firmly placed on the chopping block. I let the sheer weight of the legal document sink into the minds of everyone staring at the 20-foot projector screen. The bright white light from the projector illuminated the horrified faces of the Banks family, casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished marble floor of the St. Regis ballroom. They were looking at a fortress they could never breach. I slowly lowered my hand and turned my full attention back to the matriarch of this collapsing empire. Dolores was standing completely still, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The arrogant woman who had confidently tapped her champagne glass and read from a laminated list of demands just 20 minutes ago was now visibly trembling. I stepped away from the projector screen and walked deliberately toward her, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. The microphone in my hand felt less like an instrument of speech and more like a lethal weapon. "Dolores," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room, "you stood up here tonight and demanded that I surrender my entire financial portfolio to your exclusive management. You claimed it was for the good of the family. You claimed it was to ensure fairness when times get tough. So before I officially sign over my life savings to the Banks Family Trust, I have two very specific questions I need you to answer in front of all these witnesses." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 200 people were hanging on my every single word, their eyes darting between me and the terrified woman in the heavily beaded silver gown. "Question 1, I announced, projecting my voice so loudly and clearly that it echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. If I am giving up all of my personal assets to your control, who exactly is covering Tyrell's federal wire fraud charges that I paid a private lawyer to suppress just last month?" The entire ballroom erupted. It was not just gasps this time. It was a loud, chaotic explosion of shouts, exclamations, and frantic conversations. Auntie Brenda literally dropped her clutch onto the floor, the contents spilling out across the carpet. Cousin Marcus took a massive step away from Tyrell as if standing too close to him might result in his own arrest. The sophisticated veneer of the reception hall was completely obliterated, replaced by the raw, unfiltered shock of a high society scandal unfolding in real time. Tyrell froze entirely. The aggressive, chest-puffing man, who had threatened to physically force me to apologize just moments ago, was instantly reduced to a terrified statue. All the blood rushed from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His eyes darted wildly toward me, wide with absolute paralyzing terror. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He had spent the last 6 months securing fraudulent business loans using fake collateral, and when the federal investigators started closing in, he had begged Jordan for help. Jordan, too terrified to ask his bankrupt mother, had secretly come to me. And I had quietly paid an incredibly expensive legal team to handle the situation, simply because I did not want my wedding day ruined by an FBI raid. I had kept that secret locked away, waiting to see if they would ever show me an ounce of genuine gratitude. Instead, they had tried to steal my house. Tasha grabbed Tyrell's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into his rented tuxedo jacket. "What is she talking about, Tyrell?" Tasha shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. "What wire fraud charges? Tell me she is lying right now. Tell me you are not going to federal prison." Tyrell could not even form a coherent sentence. He just stood there, his mouth opening and closing silently, completely paralyzed by the exposure of his massive criminal liability. Dolores brought both of her hands up to her face, a low, guttural moan escaping her lips, as she realized her eldest son was not just broke, but facing severe federal prosecution. The family trust she was trying to force me to create was never meant to build a legacy. It was meant to be a massive legal slush fund to keep her golden child out of a federal penitentiary. I did not give them a single moment to recover from the devastating blow. I immediately pivoted, turning my back on Tyrell's complete meltdown, and locked my eyes directly onto my newly exposed husband. Jordan was leaning heavily against the sweetheart table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the expensive silk tablecloth. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground, but I was about to drop the final match. "Question 2. I said, my voice dropping to a colder, more dangerous register that commanded instant silence from the chaotic crowd. "Jordan, when you were bragging to your family about the incredible wealth you were bringing into this marriage, and when you secretly handed your mother the master security codes to my $2.5 million property, did you happen to tell them the truth about who actually owns it?" Jordan swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing its way down his temple. He shook his head slightly, a pathetic, silent plea for me to stop, but mercy was absolutely not on my agenda tonight. Because Tasha seems to be under the extremely delusional impression that she is packing her bags and moving her children into my guest bedrooms next Thursday, I continued, pointing a sharp finger at the projector screen, illuminating the room. "So, Jordan, did you tell your mother and your sister-in-law that the Buckhead Villa is not in my personal name, and it is most certainly not in yours? Did you explain to them that the property is solely owned by St. James Holdings?" I took a slow step toward him, making sure he felt the full crushing weight of his absolute failure. "And more importantly, Jordan, did you read the specific legal bylaws of St. James Holdings before you started handing out my house keys like party favors? Did you inform your greedy, entitled relatives that the trust explicitly and permanently excludes all spouses, partners, and in-laws from claiming any ownership, residency, or financial equity in the event of an unfinalized marriage?" The words "unfinalized marriage" hung in the air like a heavy executioner's blade. Jordan gasped, his eyes widening in sudden, horrifying comprehension. He looked at me, then looked frantically up at the massive legal document displayed on the projector screen. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance, so confident in his ability to manipulate me, that he had completely ignored the most crucial foundational detail of our entire wedding weekend. "We are at our reception, Jordan," I reminded him, my voice dripping with pure, undeniable triumph. "The lavish party, the expensive food, the beautiful cake. We did all of this today for the guests. but our private appointment with the judge to legally sign the binding marriage certificate is not scheduled until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The realization hit the Banks family with the destructive force of a freight train. Tasha let out a loud, devastated wail, her knees literally buckling beneath her as she grasped the terrifying reality of her situation. She was not moving into a luxury villa. She was going back to an apartment she was being actively evicted from, married to a man who was facing federal wire fraud charges. Dolores staggered backward, bumping hard into the edge of a guest table. The beautiful silver serving trays rattled loudly against the impact. She had orchestrated this massive, humiliating public ambush, believing she had me legally trapped as a traditional Banks wife. She genuinely thought the wedding vows we exchanged at the altar earlier today gave her total legal access to my multi-million-dollar empire. She had absolutely no idea that in the eyes of the law, Jordan and I were still just two single people attending a very expensive, very dramatic dinner party. "You have zero legal rights to me, Jordan," I stated clearly, driving the final lethal stake through the heart of his parasitic scheme. "You have zero rights to my company. You have zero rights to my accounts. And your family has absolutely zero rights to step foot onto my private property ever again. Your mother tried to stage a hostile takeover of my life, but she forgot to check if the merger had actually cleared." Jordan looked utterly destroyed. The charming, charismatic community leader had vanished, leaving behind a pathetic, desperate man who had just fumbled the greatest financial opportunity of his entire miserable life. He took a shaky step toward me, reaching out his hand in a final pitiful attempt to salvage his ruined plans. "Charmaine, please," he begged, his voice cracking, completely stripped of its former aggressive authority. "You do not have to do this. We can fix this. I will tell them they cannot move in. I will make Tyrell deal with his own legal problems. Just do not cancel the signing tomorrow. Please, I love you." The sheer audacity of his plea was almost physically repulsive. He was willing to throw his mother and his brother directly under the bus the very second he realized the money was walking out the door. His profound lack of loyalty proved exactly what I had suspected all along. He cared for absolutely no one but himself. He was a parasite willing to attach himself to whatever host could provide him with the most luxurious lifestyle. I looked at his outstretched hand, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, sterile disgust. I did not love him anymore. In fact, looking at him now, I realized I had never truly loved him. I had loved the illusion of the protective family man he had pretended to be. I had loved the idea of finally belonging somewhere. But I was done paying millions of dollars just to rent a space in a toxic, manipulative family. I was done shrinking myself to make insecure men feel powerful. I was done being the financial life support system for people who fundamentally despised my independence. I had asked my two questions, and their terrified silence had given me all the answers I would ever need to hear. The guests in the room were completely mesmerized by the absolute destruction of the Banks family. My colleagues from the venture capital firm were nodding in silent, profound respect. They had just watched me execute the most flawless, devastating corporate defense strategy they had ever witnessed, and I had done it wearing a custom Vera Wang wedding gown. The older members of Jordan's family, the ones who had been screaming at me to submit and apologize just 5 minutes prior, were now sitting in their chairs, staring at the floor in complete and total disgrace. Auntie Brenda had entirely lost her aggressive voice. Cousin Marcus was nervously adjusting his tie, clearly hoping I would not suddenly pull up his personal financial records on the massive projector screen next. They had tried to use the heavy pressure of their community to break me, but I had weaponized the exact same public forum to completely dismantle them. I turned my gaze slowly across the room, ensuring that every single person present understood the absolute finality of what had just transpired. The Banks family had demanded my total submission. They had demanded my wealth. They had demanded my home. And in return, I had publicly stripped them of every single lie they used to survive. I had exposed their debts, their crimes, and their profound lack of basic human decency. They were standing naked in front of their entire world, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to hide. I had won. The finality of my words hung heavily in the air, crushing the last fragments of hope out of the bank's family. The realization that there was no money, no house, and no trust fund anchored itself deep in their minds. The wealthy dynasty they spent the evening bragging about evaporated, leaving behind an insurmountable mountain of debt. Tyrell was the first to break. The terrifying reality of federal wire fraud charges short-circuited his arrogant brain. He turned his back and started pacing near the dance floor, running hands frantically over his closely cropped hair. He muttered rapidly to himself, ignoring Tasha, who was pulling aggressively at his sleeve, demanding to know how much prison time he was facing. Within seconds, the united front devolved into a vicious civil war. Tasha started screaming at Tyrell, crying about how her children were going to be homeless. Auntie Brenda turned her wrath onto Dolores. "You told us she was a sure thing," Brenda hissed loudly, abandoning family loyalty to save face. "You made us look like complete fools in front of all these people." I watched the chaos unfold with clinical fascination. It was like watching feral animals fighting over scraps of meat only to realize the meat was poisoned. They had built their familial bond on a foundation of mutual delusion. The moment the money was removed, their loyalty completely disintegrated. They did not care about each other as human beings. They only ever cared about who was paying the bills. The love they had constantly preached about was entirely conditional. Dolores quickly realized her matriarchal authority was rapidly collapsing. Her son was facing prison. Her sister was turning against her, and her eviction was public knowledge. Her intimidation tactics had spectacularly failed. So, like any seasoned manipulator backed into a corner, she pivoted to playing the victim. Dolores suddenly gasped loudly, a harsh sound that cut through the arguments. She clutched her heavily beaded chest with both hands, her eyes rolling back slightly. "Oh, Lord," she wailed, her voice trembling with exaggerated agony. "My heart, my chest is so tight. The stress of this attack is just too much." She dramatically swayed before collapsing heavily into a nearby dining chair, conveniently ensuring she fell gracefully enough not to ruin her silver gown. Cousin Marcus rushed to her side, hovering nervously. "Somebody call an ambulance!" Tasha shrieked, distracted from yelling at Tyrell. "She is having a heart attack." I did not move an inch. I stood perfectly still, holding the microphone at my side, watching the theatrical performance with absolute disgust. I had spent countless hours in high-stakes corporate negotiations. I knew exactly what a desperate bluff looked like. Dolores was not having a medical emergency. She was deploying a calculated distraction tactic. She wanted the narrative to instantly shift from her financial fraud to my supposed cruelty. She wanted the guests to see a monster who had literally broken a poor, defenseless older woman's heart. My mother, Elaine, used the exact same tactic whenever I confronted her about her emotional neglect during my childhood. The sudden hyperventilation, the clutching of the chest, the tearful declarations that I was killing her with disrespect. It was a manipulative strategy designed to force immediate compliance through intense guilt. But I was entirely immune to the performance. "Do not bother calling an ambulance," I said loudly, my voice ringing out over Dolores's rhythmic gasping. "Unless the paramedics accept fraudulent checks, I highly doubt she can afford the emergency room copay. She is not having a heart attack, she is having a reality check. And quite frankly, it is decades overdue." My lack of sympathy shocked the remaining guests. Dolores peeked open one eye, glaring at me with pure, unfiltered hatred, before quickly squeezing it shut and resuming her loud moans. She realized I was not going to rush to her side and beg for forgiveness. The guilt trip had completely failed. With his mother's theatrical performance failing, Jordan realized he was running out of options. His aggressive authority had been destroyed by the revelation of the company car. His family's intimidation had been neutralized. He was standing in the middle of a massive disaster, watching his luxurious future slip through his fingers. He needed a brand new strategy immediately. Jordan took a deep, steadying breath. He visibly smoothed his features entirely, wiping away the angry, arrogant scowl he had worn for the past 20 minutes. He adjusted his expensive suit jacket and completely transformed his demeanor. The demanding patriarch vanished instantly, replaced by the sensitive, understanding modern man that I had originally fallen in love with. It was a terrifyingly seamless transition, proving how deeply ingrained his manipulation truly was. He stepped away from the sweetheart table and walked slowly toward me, keeping his head slightly bowed in a display of manufactured humility. He completely ignored his mother, who was still aggressively hyperventilating right next to him. He stopped 2 feet away from me, his dark eyes looking up with an expression of deep manufactured sorrow. "Charmaine, please," Jordan whispered. He kept his voice low, intimate, and perfectly modulated, ensuring the microphone would not pick up his words. He was trying to isolate me again. "I am so sorry this got out of hand. You are absolutely right to be furious. My family is dealing with severe generational trauma regarding finances, and they handled this terribly. I should have protected you. I was just so overwhelmed by my mother's immense pressure." He took another small step forward, invading my personal space. He raised his hand slowly, telegraphing his movements so I would not pull away, and gently reached out to take my hand. His fingers brushed against my skin, warm and familiar. "We do not have to throw away our entire relationship because of their mistakes," he murmured, his thumb lightly stroking the back of my hand. "We love each other. We built a beautiful connection. We can work this out in therapy, Charmaine. We can get professional help, set firm boundaries with my family, and heal from this together, just you and me." For a fleeting second, his soft words echoed in my mind. Therapy, boundaries, healing. They were all the exact buzzwords he knew I valued. He was expertly weaponizing the language of emotional intelligence to trap me back in his web. He thought that if he acknowledged his family's toxicity and promised to go to counseling, I would forgive the ultimate betrayal of his financial ambush. He thought I was desperate enough for his love that I would actually believe his sudden, miraculous change of heart. I looked down at his hand holding mine. I felt the smooth, cold metal of the massive diamond engagement ring he had proposed with, a ring I later discovered he purchased using a line of credit he secretly opened under my home address. I felt absolutely nothing but an overwhelming wave of profound disgust. I violently snatched my hand back as if his touch had physically burned my skin. Jordan stumbled forward slightly, completely caught off guard by the sudden rejection. His sensitive, understanding facade cracked, revealing the desperate predator hiding just beneath the surface. "Do not ever touch me again," I said. I spoke directly into the microphone, ensuring his final humiliation was just as public as the ambush he endorsed. "There is no therapy for what you just did, Jordan. There is no healing from a calculated, premeditated, attempted robbery. You did not make a mistake today. You executed a deeply flawed business strategy." I took a step back, creating a definitive physical boundary. "You talk about us as if we are a team." I continued, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "You talk about working things out and setting boundaries, but you are still not listening to the facts. There is no us. There never was an us. There was only me working myself to the bone, and you figuring out how to harvest my resources." I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at his chest. "The private appointment with the judge was scheduled for tomorrow morning," I announced, ensuring the entire room heard the final death blow to his scheme. "That appointment is officially canceled. The marriage certificate will never be signed. You are nothing to me but a terrible investment that I am formally writing off immediately." The absolute certainty in my voice completely shattered his final desperate hope. There was no more backpedaling. There was no more manipulation. The total breakdown of the Banks family was now entirely complete. They had nothing left to fight with, no secrets to hide behind, and no wealth to steal. They stood in a luxury ballroom I paid for, surrounded by floral arrangements mocking their financial ruin. I looked at the broken pieces of the empire they tried to build on my back, feeling nothing but a profound sense of liberating freedom. I was finally completely done with all of them. I stood tall in the center of the St. Regis ballroom, the heavy silver microphone resting comfortably in my grip. The air in the room felt entirely different now. It was no longer thick with tension or suffocating expectations. It felt crisp, clear, and incredibly light. I looked at Jordan one last time. He was still standing there, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had tried to publicly subjugate me just half an hour ago. He had nothing left to say. There were no more lies he could spin, no more manipulative tactics he could deploy. I turned my gaze away from him and faced the sea of 200 guests. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I announced, my voice steady and echoing with absolute clarity. "I know this is not the evening any of us anticipated when we put on our formal wear and drove to Buckhead, but sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as massive disruptions. Tonight, I did not just avoid a terrible marriage. I successfully protected my life, my assets, and my peace of mind." I paused, letting the silence emphasize the magnitude of my next words. "Therefore, I am making it absolutely official right now," I declared, raising my chin. "The wedding is permanently cancelled. I am walking out of this venue as a single, fiercely independent woman. There will be no ceremony tomorrow morning. There will be no blending of families. And there will absolutely be no Banks family trust created to siphon my wealth." A low cheer rippled through the tables where my venture capital colleagues were seated. A few of them even raised their crystal champagne glasses in a silent, respectful toast to my ruthless efficiency. They understood the intricate mechanics of a hostile takeover, and they deeply respected a successful defense. Even a few of my extended family members, the ones who had watched my mother abandon me earlier, were nodding in quiet approval. I had done what so many women in that room secretly wished they had the courage to do. I had drawn an immovable boundary and defended it with overwhelming force. But the night was not over yet. I still had an incredibly expensive party to manage. Now, regarding this beautiful reception, I continued my tone, shifting seamlessly from corporate executioner to gracious host. I paid $150,000 for this luxury venue, the 5-course gourmet dinner, and the top-tier entertainment. I also paid in full for the premium open bar. I refused to let an excellent vintage champagne go to waste just because my ex-fiancé turned out to be a calculated financial predator. I swept my arm toward the fully stocked bars positioned at the illuminated corners of the massive ballroom. "So to my friends, my colleagues, and those who actually came here tonight to support me, please stay. The DJ will resume the music shortly. Eat the lobster tail, drink the Macallan 18, dance on this beautiful mahogany floor. Consider this an early celebration of my continued independence and my vastly protected net worth." I then turned my body sharply, locking my eyes back onto the cluster of terrified, humiliated people standing near the sweetheart table. My welcoming smile vanished entirely, replaced by an expression of pure, unyielding stone. "However, that invitation does not extend to everyone," I stated coldly. "The Banks family has exactly 10 minutes to gather your rented belongings and vacate these premises. If any member of your incredibly toxic family is still standing inside this ballroom when the clock strikes 9, you will be escorted out by force. You wanted to know who is in charge of this household. I am, and you are officially evicted." The reaction was instantaneous and highly predictable. Dolores, who had been miraculously cured of her fake heart attack the exact moment I mentioned the open bar, sat up perfectly straight. Her jaw dropped in sheer outrage. She looked around desperately, hoping her sister Brenda or cousin Marcus would step up to defend their honor one last time. But her loyal soldiers had completely abandoned their posts. Brenda was already discreetly sliding her clutch off the table, whispering frantically to her husband that they needed to leave before their own financial dirty laundry was magically projected onto the wall. Marcus had backed away toward the exit, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Tasha naturally was the loudest. "You cannot kick us out of a public hotel!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and grating against the quiet room. "We are guests here. We have a right to stay and eat. We drove all the way across town for this." I did not even bother addressing her delusion directly. "This is a private, reserved ballroom, Tasha," I replied dismissively. "And since my name is the only one on the 6-figure contract with the St. Regis management, I possess the sole legal authority to revoke your invitation. Your 10 minutes started 60 seconds ago. I suggest you start walking before I decide to audit the rest of your extended family and display the results on the projector." Jordan looked like he wanted the polished marble floor to open up and swallow him whole. He grabbed his mother's arm, pulling her up from the chair. "Come on, Mom," he muttered, his voice defeated and entirely devoid of its former arrogant boom. "We need to go. Let us just go." He knew it was over. He knew any further resistance would only result in more devastating public humiliation. He just wanted to escape the glaring lights and the judging eyes of the wealthy community he had tried so desperately to impress. But Tyrell was not ready to surrender. Unlike Jordan, who calculated his massive losses and chose an immediate retreat, Tyrell was a cornered animal functioning entirely on primitive rage. In the span of 30 minutes, he had lost his future mansion, his crypto trading office, his dignity, and quite possibly his freedom, given the federal wire fraud charges hanging over his head. The realization that a woman had orchestrated his total destruction was too much for his fragile, toxic ego to process. His brain completely snapped. "You stupid, arrogant witch," Tyrell roared. The sound was guttural, raw, and incredibly violent. He shoved Tasha out of his way with such force that she stumbled backward into a tall floral arrangement, sending white orchids crashing to the floor. Tyrell lowered his head and charged directly at me. He was a large man, easily over 6 feet tall, and built like a linebacker, moving with terrifying speed across the short distance separating us. His fists were balled so tightly his knuckles were stark white, and his eyes were wide with unhinged, murderous intent. He intended to physically assault me, to beat me into submission right there on the dance floor in front of 200 people. A collective scream erupted from the guest tables. Several of my male colleagues jumped up from their chairs, shouting in loud alarm, rushing forward to intercept him. Jordan yelled his brother's name in a panicked warning, reaching out uselessly to grab the back of his rented tuxedo jacket, but he was far too slow. The DJ scrambled backward behind his expensive equipment, terrified of the impending violence. I did not scream, I did not run, I did not even take a single step backward. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my eyes locked onto the massive man hurtling toward me. I was completely calm because I never left my physical safety to chance, just as I never left my financial safety to chance. When I ran the comprehensive background checks on the Banks family 3 months ago, I discovered Tyrell's extensive history of violent domestic disputes and aggressive altercations whenever his fraudulent schemes fell apart. I knew exactly what kind of monster he was beneath the rented suit, and I had meticulously prepared for his inevitable explosion. Before Tyrell could close the final 10 feet between us, the heavy velvet curtains flanking the main ballroom doors violently flew open. 4 massive, identically suited men stepped seamlessly out of the shadows. They moved with terrifying synchronized speed, an elite private security detail I had quietly hired weeks in advance for exactly this scenario. These were not standard hotel bouncers. They were highly trained professionals, men who specialized in neutralizing high-level physical threats without breaking a sweat. Tyrell did not even see them coming. The lead security guard, a man built like a solid brick wall, stepped effortlessly into Tyrell's blind path. He did not throw a punch. He simply planted his feet, absorbed the full aggressive impact of Tyrell's charging weight, and executed a flawless, brutal takedown. He grabbed Tyrell by the lapels of his tuxedo, twisted his momentum using his own weight against him, and slammed him face first into the polished mahogany dance floor. The sickening thud of Tyrell's body hitting the hardwood echoed loudly through the room, silencing the screaming crowd instantly. Before Tyrell could even attempt to struggle or throw a blind punch, the other 3 guards were on top of him. One drove a heavy knee firmly into Tyrell's lower back, pinning his spine flat to the floor. Another wrenched Tyrell's arms behind his back with mechanical precision, locking his wrists tightly together in an inescapable, agonizing grip. The 4th guard stood perfectly straight above the pile, scanning the rest of the Banks family with a cold, terrifying warning in his eyes, daring anyone else to make a sudden move. Tyrell thrashed wildly against the floor, his face smashed against the wood, screaming absolute obscenities and aggressively threatening to kill me. But his threats were completely useless. He was entirely immobilized, pinned securely beneath hundreds of pounds of highly trained muscle. The aggressive, domineering alpha male had been instantly reduced to a screaming, helpless captive on the floor of my reception hall. Tasha shrieked hysterically, attempting to run forward to help her husband, but the standing security guard simply raised one massive black-gloved hand. Tasha froze instantly in her tracks, her basic self-preservation finally overriding her dramatic entitlement. Dolores let out a horrified wail, clutching Jordan's arm desperately, as she watched her golden child treated exactly like a common street criminal. Jordan stood completely paralyzed, his eyes darting wildly between my calm face and his brother's pinned body, fully realizing the absolute terrifying extent of the power I wielded in this room. I looked down at Tyrell, struggling pathetically on the floor. I adjusted my grip on the microphone and took one deliberate step closer, ensuring he could hear my voice over his own frantic shouting. "I told you I was a senior vice president of acquisitions, Tyrell," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the surround sound system, icy and completely devoid of emotion. "Did you honestly think I would dismantle a hostile takeover without bringing my own corporate security detail? You are a pathetic, entirely predictable man, and your time in my venue has officially expired." I looked up at the lead security guard, who was still holding Tyrell firmly against the mahogany floor without breaking a sweat. "Escort this man off the property immediately," I ordered calmly. "Do not let him stop at the coat check. Do not let him use the restroom. Drag him directly out the front doors of the St. Regis and leave him on the sidewalk. If he attempts to step foot back inside this building tonight, or if he resists in any way during the walk, call the Atlanta Police Department and hand them the federal wire fraud dossier I provided you earlier this evening." The lead guard nodded sharply in professional acknowledgement. "Understood, Miss St. James." The guards hauled Tyrell up from the floor, keeping his arms locked tightly behind his back. He continued to yell, kicking his legs, but they marched him swiftly and forcefully toward the exit, dragging him out of the ballroom like a bag of trash. I then turned my gaze to Jordan, Dolores, and the remaining stragglers of the Banks family. My expression was resolute, a final, unyielding wall of absolute authority. "The rest of you have exactly 6 minutes left on your eviction notice," I announced softly. Yet the words carried the heavy weight of a judge delivering a final verdict. "I strongly suggest you follow Tyrell out the door before my team has to manually assist you as well. This family meeting is officially adjourned." The reality of the 6-minute warning crashed down on the remaining members of the Banks family like a massive concrete block. The impenetrable illusion of their untouchable status had been thoroughly shattered by the violent, highly efficient removal of Tyrell. Facing the immovable wall of my elite private security detail, their arrogant defiance rapidly dissolved into chaotic, desperate panic. They suddenly realized they were no longer dealing with a desperate bride seeking their approval. They were dealing with a corporate executive who had just successfully executed a ruthless eviction protocol. Dolores scrambled to her feet, her previous fake medical emergency entirely forgotten in the face of imminent physical removal. She grabbed her expensive designer clutch from the table, her hands shaking so violently that she dropped it twice onto the floor. She knelt down, her heavily beaded silver gown dragging across the spilled water and champagne on the floor, frantically searching for her scattered belongings. Tasha was completely beside herself, spinning in frantic circles as she tried to gather her things. In a truly pathetic display of unadulterated greed, she actually grabbed her oversized purse and began stuffing silver serving tongs, expensive cloth napkins, and leftover lobster tails directly into the bag. She was desperately trying to extract whatever minor physical value she could from the ruins of her massive failed heist. Two more of my security guards stepped forward, their presence radiating a quiet, terrifying authority. They did not shout or raise their voices. They simply formed a wide tactical perimeter and began walking slowly toward the Banks family table, effectively herding them toward the main exit like a flock of unruly cattle. "Move it along right now, ladies and gentlemen," the tallest guard instructed, his voice, a deep, resonant rumble that brooked absolutely no argument. "You have exactly 4 minutes left before we upgrade this situation to a criminal trespassing violation, and I assure you the local police department will not be as gentle as we are." The extended family members broke into a frantic, undignified run. The aunts, uncles, and older cousins who had spent the entire evening looking down their noses at me, boldly demanding my submission, were now practically tripping over their own expensive shoes to escape the ballroom. They aggressively shoved past each other in a desperate bid to reach the heavy velvet curtains, completely abandoning their revered matriarch in their cowardly rush to avoid being physically handled by the security team. Dolores tried desperately to maintain some semblance of her manufactured dignity, but the sheer speed of the forced eviction made it entirely impossible. As she rushed toward the exit, pushed along by the firm presence of a security guard directly behind her, the heel of her silver shoe caught hard on the thick carpet. She stumbled violently, colliding shoulder first with the heavy wooden doorframe. The harsh impact violently knocked her elaborate, expensive wig entirely askew, shifting the hairline drastically to the right and exposing the graying, unstyled natural roots underneath. Several heavy bobby pins popped out and clattered onto the floor. She gasped in absolute horror, bringing both hands up to her head in a frantic attempt to fix her completely ruined crown. But the security guards kept moving her forward without an ounce of pity, forcing her out into the brightly lit hallway for everyone to see. Tasha was sobbing uncontrollably now, the harsh, ugly sounds echoing loudly off the polished marble walls of the corridor. "My house," she wailed, thick black mascara running in heavy lines down her cheeks, completely ruining her dramatic makeup. "My beautiful guest rooms. What are we going to do, Dolores? We are getting legally evicted on Tuesday morning. Where are my kids going to sleep?" "I already packed their boxes." Dolores snapped at her, her voice shrill and dripping with venom. "Shut your mouth, Tasha. Just shut up right now. This is all your stupid husband's fault for getting caught by the federal government. If he had covered his tracks better, none of this would be happening." The mask of the loving, deeply united family had completely disintegrated. They were viciously turning on each other like a pack of starved wolves fighting over a single bone. Their toxic, conditional dynamic finally laid bare for the entire hotel staff to witness. I followed at a safe distance, flanked by my lead security guard, walking slowly and deliberately down the grand corridor that led to the main lobby of the St. Regis. I wanted to see them out. I needed to witness the absolute final conclusion of this dark chapter of my life. The St. Regis lobby was a breathtaking masterpiece of modern luxury, featuring towering crystal chandeliers, imported Italian marble floors, and massive arrangements of fresh white roses. It was a place explicitly designed for quiet elegance, wealthy discretion, and refined behavior. The Banks family completely shattered that serene atmosphere the moment they spilled out of the elevators. They burst into the grand lobby looking like a chaotic, screaming mob. Through the large glass windows, I could see that Tyrell had already been forcefully ejected through the revolving front doors and was currently pacing furiously on the illuminated sidewalk outside, aggressively yelling at a highly confused valet attendant who was refusing to give him the keys to my corporate vehicle. Jordan was the absolute last one to step off the elevator. He looked physically ill, his skin completely drained of color. The horrifying reality of his situation had finally bypassed his massive ego and settled heavily into his bones. He was not just losing a wealthy wife tonight. He was losing his luxury car, his unlimited access to my Buckhead villa, the corporate credit cards he regularly used to fund his extravagant non-profit galas, and his entire carefully curated identity as a highly successful provider. He was stepping out of a five-star luxury hotel and walking directly into absolute financial ruin. He realized he was going back to being completely broke, heavily indebted, and entirely homeless. As the security guards herded his weeping mother and hysterical sister-in-law toward the revolving glass doors, Jordan suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around and saw me standing at the very top of the grand marble staircase that overlooked the massive lobby. My custom Vera Wang gown flowed elegantly around me, catching the brilliant light of the overhead chandeliers. I looked down at him from my elevated position, completely untouched by the desperate chaos unfolding below me. Jordan broke violently away from the group. He ran frantically back toward the base of the staircase, completely ignoring the sharp verbal warning from my security team. Before the guards could physically intercept him, Jordan dropped heavily onto both of his knees. The sharp, painful thud of his knees hitting the hard Italian marble echoed loudly through the cavernous lobby, drawing shocked open-mouthed stares from the hotel concierge and several wealthy guests who were checking in at the front desk. "Charmaine, please," Jordan begged, his voice cracking loudly in the quiet space. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and leaking genuine tears of sheer unadulterated desperation. "I am begging you. I have absolutely nothing left. The nonprofit organization is completely out of operational funding. I have zero money in my personal savings account. If you take the company car and lock me out of the house, I will literally be living on the street by next week. Please, you know I love you. You know my real heart. I was just trying to be a good son to my mother. Give me one more chance to prove I can be a good husband to you. We can fix this right now." It was the most pathetic, humiliating display I had ever witnessed in my entire life. The fiercely proud man who had confidently ordered me to submit to his mother just an hour ago was now literally groveling on the floor of a public hotel lobby, begging a woman for a financial lifeline. He did not care about losing me as a loving partner. He was mourning the sudden, devastating loss of his personal ATM machine. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely zero pity. My mind briefly flashed back to my own mother, Elaine, walking coldly out of the ballroom earlier tonight, turning her back on me when I needed her the most. For my entire life, I had desperately chased the conditional love of a family. I had achieved straight A's, built a massive corporate empire, and bought a multi-million-dollar home, all in a subconscious attempt to finally prove I was worthy of being loved and protected. I had almost let Jordan and his parasitic family exploit that deep, lingering childhood wound. But watching my own mother walk away tonight had finally killed the last remaining ghost of that desperate little girl. It had forced me to accept a brutal but incredibly liberating truth. The emotional coldness of my childhood home and the aggressive financial toxicity of the Banks family were just two different sides of the exact same abusive coin. Neither of them truly cared about my well-being. I realized in that exact moment, standing on the marble staircase, that the only person who was ever going to actively protect my peace was me. I did not need a family, biological or married, to validate my existence. I was the sole architect of my own safety, and I would protect my kingdom at all costs. "Get him out of my sight right now," I said quietly to the lead security guard standing beside me on the stairs. The massive guard descended the marble staircase swiftly. He grabbed Jordan roughly by the back of his expensive suit collar, hauled him forcefully off his knees, and shoved him hard toward the revolving doors. Jordan stumbled forward, weeping openly and uncontrollably now, until he was forcefully ejected onto the cold concrete sidewalk alongside his screaming, ruined family. I stood alone at the top of the stairs, watching the heavy glass doors spin to a complete stop permanently and legally separating my world from theirs. I reached over to a passing hotel waiter holding a silver tray and picked up a fresh crystal flute of perfectly chilled champagne. I brought the glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid tasted exactly like absolute victory. A massive, suffocating weight that I had been unknowingly carrying for my entire life completely lifted from my shoulders. I was finally truly free. I finished the champagne and handed the empty crystal flute back to the passing waiter. I did not return to the ballroom right away. Instead, I signaled my lead security guard, instructing him to ensure the remaining guests were enjoying the premium open bar and the catered dinner without any further interruptions. The party I had funded was going to continue, but I no longer needed to be the center of attention. My presence was no longer required to maintain an illusion. I walked out of the St. Regis through a private side exit, bypassing the main lobby where the Banks family had just been spectacularly humiliated. My hired black car was already waiting at the curb, the engine purring softly in the cool Atlanta night. I climbed into the spacious leather back seat, the heavy door closing with a solid, comforting thud that completely severed me from the chaos of the evening. The drive back to my Buckhead villa was incredibly peaceful. I watched the vibrant city lights of Atlanta streak past the tinted windows, reflecting off the dark interior of the car. For the past 12 months, every single car ride with Jordan had been filled with his endless, exhausting monologues about his family legacy, his nonprofit organization, and his grandiose plans for our combined financial future. The silence in the car tonight was a profound luxury. I did not have to pretend to be interested in his manipulative schemes. I did not have to shrink myself or carefully monitor my tone to avoid bruising his incredibly fragile ego. I leaned my head against the cool glass, taking deep, steadying breaths, feeling the adrenaline of the massive confrontation slowly drain from my system. When the black car finally turned onto my private tree-lined street, the sheer beauty of my custom-built home came into view. The $2.5 million villa stood magnificently against the night sky, its modern geometric lines illuminated by soft, strategically placed exterior lighting. This was my sanctuary. This was the physical manifestation of 10 grueling years of corporate warfare, sleepless nights, and relentless ambition. Jordan and his family had looked at this masterpiece and seen nothing but an easy target, a free luxury hotel they could simply commandeer. They had fundamentally misunderstood the fierce, unyielding protection I had placed around my assets. I thanked the driver and walked up the wide stone pathway to the heavy double front doors. The moment I stepped inside the grand foyer, I did not bother turning on the main chandelier. I walked straight past the sweeping glass staircase and headed directly to the master control panel of my state-of-the-art smart home security system. The sleek, glowing touchscreen was mounted flush against the wall in the central hallway. I placed my thumb against the biometric scanner, instantly granting myself high-level administrative access. My first order of business was completely eradicating any trace of the bank's family from my digital fortress. I navigated to the user access menu and found Jordan's profile. With a single satisfying tap, I entirely deleted his biometric data, his personalized entry codes, and his remote application permissions. He could no longer unlock the front doors, open the garage, or even disarm the perimeter alarms. Next, I located the temporary master codes Jordan had secretly generated and handed over to his mother 3 days ago. Dolores had probably planned to waltz right through my front doors next week with her measuring tapes and her entitled attitude. I deactivated those codes instantly, permanently voiding them from the system registry. Finally, I initiated a complete system lockdown. The heavy deadbolts on all exterior doors engaged simultaneously with a loud synchronized click. The reinforced security gates at the end of the driveway slid shut and magnetically locked. The high-definition perimeter cameras shifted into active motion tracking mode. My home was now an impenetrable fortress, and I was the sole remaining occupant. Satisfied that my physical safety was absolutely guaranteed, I kicked off my satin heels, leaving them abandoned on the plush hallway rug. I walked barefoot across the cool, imported hardwood floors, the heavy silk skirt of my Vera Wang wedding gown whispering softly behind me. I bypassed the main living room and headed straight for the custom-built wet bar tucked into the corner of my expansive open-concept kitchen. I reached past the standard bottles of wine and pulled out my most prized bottle of liquor, a Macallan 18-year-old single malt scotch. I grabbed a heavy crystal tumbler from the glass shelving, dropped in a single perfectly spherical ice cube, and poured a generous measure of the rich amber liquid. I carried the glass to the massive white marble island that anchored the center of the kitchen. I set my smartphone down onto the cool stone surface and took a slow, appreciative sip of the scotch. The complex, smoky flavor burned pleasantly down my throat, grounding me entirely in the present moment. I looked around the quiet, pristine kitchen, taking in the high-end stainless steel appliances, the custom cabinetry, and the complete absence of anyone else's demanding presence. Then the marble island began to vibrate violently. My smartphone screen lit up, piercing the dim lighting of the kitchen with a bright, relentless glare. Notifications began flooding the display in a rapid, chaotic cascade. I leaned over and looked at the locked screen. There were exactly 85 missed calls. The vast majority of them were from Jordan, but several came from unknown numbers, likely burner phones or borrowed devices, because I had proactively blocked Dolores, Tyrell, and Tasha from my main contacts list. The sheer volume of the digital assault was staggering. They had just been forcefully evicted from a luxury hotel, exposed as complete financial frauds, and thrown out onto the street, yet their first instinct was to immediately launch a relentless harassment campaign against the very woman they had just attempted to ruin. I tapped the screen, unlocking the device, and opened my visual voicemail application. Jordan alone had left 14 separate audio messages in the span of 30 minutes. I pressed play on the most recent one, letting his panicked voice fill my quiet kitchen on speakerphone. "Charmaine, please pick up the phone," Jordan begged, his voice breathy and frantic, completely devoid of his usual smooth charisma. "I am standing outside a gas station on Peachtree Street. The hotel security literally threw us onto the sidewalk. You canceled my corporate credit card, Charmaine. I tried to order a premium black car to get my mother home, and the card was declined in front of everyone. I have absolutely no access to our joint checking account. I cannot even afford a cheap motel room for the night. You cannot just leave us out here like this. I know you are incredibly angry, but you are being completely unreasonable now. We need to talk about this like adults. Please just wire me $500 so I can get my family to safety, and we can discuss the marriage certificate tomorrow." I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh and deleted the voicemail immediately. The absolute audacity of the man was simply breathtaking. He had spent the entire evening attempting to steal my $2.5 million house, and now he was desperately begging me for a $500 microloan just to survive the night. He was still trying to manipulate me, still attempting to use guilt to extract my resources. He genuinely believed that if he framed his complete financial ruin as a safety issue, my supposed feminine compassion would override my logic. He was entirely wrong. I moved down the list and played a voicemail from an unrecognized number. It was Dolores. Her voice was shrill, completely unhinged, and vibrating with an uncontrollable, venomous rage. "You listen to me, you arrogant, disrespectful little girl," Dolores shrieked into the receiver. "You think you can just embarrass the Banks family in front of our entire church congregation and walk away clean. You think you can expose my personal financial business and have my oldest son violently assaulted by your hired thugs. I am calling my lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. I am suing you for massive emotional distress. I am suing you for public defamation of character. I am going to take that fancy house of yours in civil court, and I am going to make sure your corporate bosses know exactly what kind of unstable, vicious woman you truly are. You ruined my life tonight, Charmaine, and I am going to completely destroy yours." I took another sip of my scotch, completely unfazed by her ridiculous, legally baseless threats. Dolores did not have a lawyer. She could not even afford to pay her own mortgage, let alone retain high-priced civil litigation counsel. Her threat to sue me for emotional distress was nothing more than a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim a tiny fraction of the power I had violently stripped away from her. She was a cornered, toothless predator, barking at a locked steel door. I deleted her voicemail with a single swipe of my finger, permanently erasing her toxic voice from my sanctuary. Finally, I opened my text messages. Tasha had somehow bypassed my block by messaging me through a third-party encrypted application we had used once to coordinate a family birthday gift months ago. The messages were coming in rapidly, one after another, in a frantic, panicked stream of consciousness. "Charmaine, please, you have to help us. Tyrell got into a massive screaming match with an Uber driver, and the guy kicked us out on the side of the highway. It is freezing out here, and the kids are crying at home with the babysitter. I know Tyrell messed up with the wire fraud thing, but that is not my fault. I am your sister-in-law. You cannot let me suffer. Please, cash at me $500 right now. I promise we will not move into the villa. Just help me get a hotel room. Please answer me." I stared at the glowing text on the screen, reading the absolute desperation of a woman who had confidently claimed ownership of my guest bedrooms just an hour prior. Tasha had gleefully stood by while her husband demanded my home office. She had cheered as her mother-in-law attempted to seize my bank accounts. She had aggressively told me to go find my place. Now stripped of the fake wealth and the rented luxury, she was reduced to begging the woman she despised for basic survival funds. I did not reply. I did not block the third-party application. I simply placed the phone face down on the cold marble island, completely cutting off their desperate digital connection. I picked up my crystal glass, walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking my heavily secured, meticulously landscaped backyard, and smiled into the darkness. I had survived the ultimate betrayal, completely severed the parasitic ties, and emerged with my entire empire intact. Tomorrow, I would call my legal team and officially finalize the total separation, but tonight, I was just going to enjoy the absolute glorious silence of my incredibly expensive, beautifully empty home. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer silk drapes of my master bedroom, casting a warm golden glow across the imported Egyptian cotton sheets. I woke up slowly, stretching my arms out across the massive California king bed. For the first time in an entire year, the space beside me was completely empty. There was no heavy snoring. There was no subtle anxiety gnawing at the edge of my consciousness, whispering that I needed to wake up early to cook breakfast for a man who did absolutely nothing to provide for our household. There was only the gentle hum of the central air conditioning and the beautiful, uninterrupted silence of a home that belonged entirely to me. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling a profound sense of physical lightness. The suffocating weight of the Banks family expectations had vanished into the night. I threw back the covers, slipped into a plush silk robe, and walked barefoot down the grand glass staircase. The villa was immaculate. Without Jordan leaving his cheap shoes in the hallway or his half-empty protein shakers on the kitchen counters, the space finally looked exactly as my interior designer had intended. I walked into the kitchen, the morning light reflecting brilliantly off the white marble island where I had left my phone the night before. I picked up the device. The screen was completely dark. The battery had died overnight from the sheer volume of frantic messages and missed calls from people who no longer mattered. I calmly plugged the phone into the charger, turned it on, and walked over to my professional-grade espresso machine to brew a double shot of dark roast. By 8 o'clock sharp, I was sitting at my custom home office desk, sipping my espresso and dialing the direct line to my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring, having already been briefed by my security team late last night regarding the incident at the St. Regis. I did not mince words. I instructed him to immediately and permanently dissolve the single joint checking account Jordan and I had opened 2 months prior. The account was supposed to be for shared household expenses, but I was the only one who had ever deposited a single dime into it. My lawyer executed the wire transfer within minutes, moving every last cent back into my private portfolio. He then officially canceled our 9 o'clock appointment at the Fulton County Courthouse. The marriage certificate would remain entirely blank. Legally, Jordan Banks was officially erased from my financial footprint, reduced to nothing more than a highly regrettable accounting error that had been swiftly corrected. But I was not quite finished cleaning house. I walked up to the master closet and grabbed 3 large, heavy-duty trash bags. I began tossing Jordan's belongings into the plastic with absolute ruthless efficiency. I threw in his collection of cheap, off-the-rack suits that he pretended were tailored. I tossed in his imitation designer watches, his half-used bottles of basic cologne, and the ridiculous self-help books about building generational wealth that he loved to quote but never actually practiced. I did not fold anything. I did not care if the fabrics wrinkled or the bottles leaked. In less than 20 minutes, his entire existence in my Buckhead villa was compacted into 3 black garbage bags. I did not bother driving the bags anywhere myself. My time was far too valuable. Instead, I hired a premium same-day private courier service. I gave the driver highly specific instructions. He was to drive the garbage bags directly to Decatur and dump them unceremoniously on the crumbling front porch of Dolores Banks' foreclosed townhouse. I paid him a massive cash tip to ensure he did not knock, did not wait for a signature, and absolutely did not engage in any conversation. I pictured Dolores and Jordan probably sitting in her dark living room waiting for the bank eviction notice, only to hear the heavy thud of his cheap belongings hitting their rotting wooden porch. It was the exact level of disrespect they had earned. With my home fully purged and my assets completely secured, I walked back upstairs to my master suite. I poured myself a fresh cup of hot coffee and stepped out onto the expansive sunlit balcony overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The morning air was crisp and incredibly refreshing. The city below was bustling with energy, totally unaware of the massive empire that had fallen and the personal kingdom that had been fiercely defended the night before. I pulled out my fully charged smartphone and opened the camera application. I held up my coffee mug, capturing the perfect angle of the morning sun hitting the steam rising from the dark liquid with my sprawling, pristine backyard clearly visible in the background. My manicured hand looked light and elegant, entirely free of the fraudulent diamond engagement ring I had left sitting on the kitchen counter for the jewelers to appraise and liquidate later this afternoon. I snapped the picture. It was simple, elegant, and radiated absolute unbothered peace. I opened my Instagram application, uploaded the photo, and typed out a short, devastatingly clear caption. Serving only myself from now on. St. James Holdings just acquired peace of mind. I hit the publish button. I knew for an absolute fact that Jordan, Tasha, and the rest of the extended Banks family were frantically refreshing my social media pages from their cracked screens, desperately searching for any sign of weakness or regret. Instead, they got a front row seat to my complete and total triumph. I turned off my phone notifications, set the device down on the patio table, and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my coffee. They thought they could use the name of family to build a kingdom on my back, but they forgot I owned the land. Have you ever had to legally separate yourself from financial parasites? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you know your worth.